Welcome back, everyone. I hope everybody enjoyed the lunch. Welcome as well to the audience that's joining us online. We are live streaming this session on the partnership between NRG and Unilever, taking a portfolio approach to investing in renewable energy, both on-site and off-site. We're thrilled today to have three panelists, and it's exciting that we get to bring Andrew Winston into this conversation, and we're going to start with him in terms of how this partnership developed. Jonathan Atwood is the Vice President of Sustainable Living and Corporate Communications at Unilever. Jonathan spoke actually at an event we had 2 years ago announcing another Unilever initiative, Project Sunlight. And Unilever, there's a great article in GreenBiz if anybody wants to go take a look at it on Unilever's partnership approach and just how much they've done on multiple levels in this space, which I encourage everybody to go look at. Also thrilled to be joined by Lynda Clemmons, who's the Managing Director at NRG Energy. And we've had David Crane in to speak 3 occasions in the past few years. And students every time have come away going, I can't believe a CEO just said that. That was really incredible. Like, did he just say that about climate change and sustainability? Is he really approaching that? Yeah. And really a refreshing approach to how do you communicate and how do you communicate publicly about the initiatives of a firm that's really pushing the boundaries of where they can go. And then Andrew, everybody has been introduced to already. But within this partnership, the great thing is that we get to tell the story from the genesis. And I'll start with you, Andrew, just on, how did this come about? How did this begin? And then, Jonathan, I'll take it to you, and then Lynda with a couple of specific questions.
Okay, so it was a dark and stormy night. It was this. I'm blanking on the time. This has been a year. You guys have been a year now, right? So it's December,
May 7th.
We announced in May of 14.
Of 14, right? So. Why am I up here again? And I just was asked like 3 to 5 minutes ago, so I don't have a lot prepared. But they asked me to come up and explain how important and wonderful I was to the partnership. So I thought, okay, I can do that. But I actually had an interesting time, I guess, for kind of my work. I mostly, as you guys may know, I write, I speak, I pontificate, and I kind of catalyze change and push change. So I don't often, and I do some consulting, but I don't often have times where I can say, okay, that happened because I kind of stuck my nose in, and this was one of those few. So it's a kind of fun and rewarding for me to see this kind of moving. But I was really just there at the beginning, and what happened was I sit on Unilever's Sustainability Advisory Board, so we meet. It's been a couple years now. We meet every quarter and kind of talk about their strategies, their development. And it's really fun because Unilever's kind of leading the world in many ways on this stuff. And they have an unusual couple of leaders in Paul Pullman at the CEO level, but then the kind of lesser known of the leaders is Kees Kruithof, who's the North American head. He runs a small $10 billion business for Unilever. But he also has this incredible passion for all of these issues, and it's not from his work with Paul, like they came up very separately, and Paul was relatively new to Unilever, actually. Kees has been there his whole career. But they're both Dutch, which I don't think is random, by the way, but they have this view of the world. And so I thought, okay, here's a very passionate leader. And then I was doing a little work with NRG, and that was through my partners, my friends at PwC. Did they leave? Mm-hmm. I think they... Oh, you took off your jacket. I was looking for Don. Yeah. I was like, you're in the same place, but I just blanked. So yeah, so I do some work with PwC, and they were working with NRG and invited me to come just kind of speak to David Crane and his core team. And I had that moment too of hearing him talk about moving away from coal and all these things that seem remarkably heretical for a company that's 70%, I think, or 65 or 70% coal-based electricity. And it was partly as simple as these two leaders really need to meet, but there was this kind of clear need that we were talking about in the Unilever meeting. How do we take the company much further, much faster, much bigger goals, like things like big renewable goal? And then I'm in a meeting with NRG, and these are literally 1 day apart meetings. And I'm in a meeting with NRG and hearing, well, how do we make that transition away from where we've been to where the world needs to go? And I thought, well, these two really need to get together because the utilities that are ready to move, and that's pretty much David, of the utilities that are really, really ready to move. I think there's like a couple that you could argue are making the shift. There's E.ON in Europe, and there's NRG here, and a couple others. They need, frankly, demand, right? I mean, that's kind of my world, is how do you get companies to do far more, far faster? They need demand to transition away from coal. It isn't just going to happen magically. And then on the other hand, the companies that want to do it need providers, need partners that can actually make that happen across this very wide range of energy use for a company like Unilever, from huge amounts of electricity at factories to thermal to office buildings, everything. So it was literally just like, let's get these two CEOs together. And then, of course, in reality, the CSOs and the sustainability people have to get together and start talking. And then it happened very quickly. And this is the thing that I love about Case as a leader at Unilever, was within a few months, he was willing to go public and say, we'll be 100% renewable by 2020, without really knowing how that would happen. And that's where I then handed off to them to say, okay, go make that happen. Have fun. And this is what's great about my job. I don't have to do that. I have to say, go ahead. So that's all. Is that, I think, did I capture what?
That's fair.
That's fair. And I wasn't, unfortunately, I was away. I wasn't there for the actual meeting of minds of these two. But so maybe you can give some perspective on.
So the timing,
like.
the timing, interestingly enough, and I should just say that I'm a little freaked out. My first time at Yale, I live in Connecticut, but my first time at Yale, I'm probably the only person in the room that doesn't have an advanced degree. So I get a little tense, but I'll get through it. Oh, good. Raise your hand if you don't have an advanced degree. Maybe that's the way to start.
Yeah.
That's just my self-talk. That's just me, but I'm going to get through it. We had that conversation at the Advisory Council in December of 13. We announced on May 7th of 2014.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the track it was. But my little role at Unilever is all about trying to take the global Unilever Sustainable Living Plan and make it relevant and embedding it in the North American business for the US and Canada. So it's basically translating kind of the global goals and bringing it down and making it very, very relevant. And one of the things that we're working really hard on is obviously brands with a purpose, which we can talk about, transformational partnerships, and sustainable agriculture. But it's in this transformational partnership space that this partnership sits, along with several others, where basically we've taken the view that we were doing lots and lots and lots of things, but the totality and adding all those things up, it wasn't having that much impact. Whether we were talking about recycling, whether we were talking about, fill in the blank. And so we've now decided that we're going to play big in certain places with the advice and counsel of the Advisory Council and with the alignment of the business. And renewable energy, December we talk, May we announce, and we announce a target of by 2020 being 100% renewable. We sit here today without a solar panel. We sit here today with a small but fledgling wind situation going on in Texas. But in other words, we set it before we actually knew how to get there. And that's kind of, I would say, customary of Unilever, where we set targets that are pretty far out there. We don't really know how to get there. And then we go out looking for partners that can get us there. I coined the term, despite the fact that some others may think that they coined it. I coined the term that I thought that David Crane was the Paul Pullman of energy. They think very similarly. There's a passion, and there's a sense of urgency. And the attraction to us about David and NRG was they're on a very urgent and directed path, as are we. They have challenges, we have challenges, and we thought who better than them to kind of come into an approach that looks a lot different than a lot of other approaches. Stay with us for a period of time and move forward together. So that's really how it started. And I got all my own personal stuff out of the way, so I'm good.
Great.
It's out there.
It's out there. Everything's out there. I'm feeling like a new man already.
And Lynda, what did this look like from your perspective at NRG? You have this announcement. It comes in. You've got Unilever focusing on a transformational partnership. How does NRG come and learn and adapt and be able to bring value to that partnership?
So you get a call from David who says, hey, I want you to meet with Unilever in San Francisco next week, and I want you to have ready to present to them all the things that we think we can do for them. So I want you to look across all their businesses. I want you to think about from the boots on the ground up, so the opposite from the way Jonathan tends to look at the world. How can we start with one solar panel, and how can we make a transformational change? And how can we do that collectively as a partnership, but in a way that brings other companies along with us? And so, his goal was to make this very public, which was coincidentally exactly what Unilever was looking to do as well. And really, it was a meeting of the minds of sustainability people and business people trying to put together a plan that was being fostered by both of our CEOs, which is, of course, tremendous in itself and is fairly unusual, given the number of companies that I work with that have a lot of push from one side or another that they really want to make a sustainability impact, but they're not necessarily getting support throughout the entire organization. So from NRG's perspective, having a potential partner in someone like Unilever was really just, it couldn't have been better. Mm-hmm. And then to continue to work with the team that's dedicated to this partnership and allows us to go out, when you go out and you talk to the CEO, you talk to the sustainability folks, you talk to the communications folks, you can get a certain story. You go to the factory, and it's a very different story sometimes about just how engaged they want to be in this whole sustainability business and what's it going to mean to their employees, what's it going to mean to their facilities, what's it going to mean to how operations work for them. And so making that translation of we can work with your business, we can work with your hours, we can work with all of the things that you need as a factory director to accomplish these much larger goals so that we can show everybody it can happen.
Yeah, so building on that, I mean, Jonathan had mentioned, you don't have a solar panel on yet. You've got this fledgling wind investment that could be coming through. How do you go from that announcement on May 7th to steel in the ground? And when you're thinking about this portfolio approach for Unilever, Jonathan, how do you go back and sell that internally toward each individual area and group that has to be able to approve and understand it once you get the kind of insight and idea from NRG on what should be put in place?
I initially thought that the press release was the hardest part. Mm-hmm. I've been proven wrong. So May 7th came and went. We had the press release. We got teams together. And I think you might have a different description, which would be great. But what was unique about this was I kind of had a feeling that we were going to be in a lot of very virgin territory internally about this conversation, that this was not going to be a straight kind of the technical people talk to the technical people and we'll just kind of hammer this out. This actually includes people within communication, sustainability, finance, procurement, environmental health and safety, legal. Am I missing anybody? HR? I don't know if HR was in it, but
yeah.
But in other words, and every single group there was a period of education on our side. I think an education for you in terms of working with someone like us. We only signed a master PPA 3 weeks ago. Yeah, well. It took from May 7th until 3 weeks ago to actually get through the document that creates the framework for the way forward. Mm-hmm. And also trying to align the U.S. business with my colleagues in London at the headquarters. But as I like to say, if it's easy, it's not worth doing. And I know that all this work is not something that it's going to be hard all the way through. But I think we've come through a very, very difficult time that's actually going to pay dividends now in speed going forward. A lot of folks, we had lots of complicated conversations. Again, I'm not the technical expert, but conversations about financial leases versus capital leases. And where do they show up on the P&L? I mean, I step out of that conversation, but there were plenty of people in it, right? And what about the plant? And I thought going in, because I'm kind of a simple guy, I thought that if we just put a solar panel on every roof of every building we had, this story's over and we can keep moving. I think if we did that, I think we get to 5%.
It's harder than that.
So we were going to be a little short with that mentality, right? And so it was going to take solar, it was going to take wind, it's going to take some new technology, it's going to be maybe some things that we don't even know about yet. And then there are a bunch of other ideas that we have as well. So, but my experience, I think I've spoken to colleagues, my experience has pretty much been the same experience for lots of our folks who have never been in a PPA conversation, who have never been in the pricing of electricity. What about the issue of thermal? I mean, the host of issues is really long, but we're now in it. We feel like we're really in it now. And we're moving forward.
Can I just, from the outside, because I mostly just let you guys go, but I was talking to you all this time and had continual meetings from the outside. I learned a lot also about kind of the challenges of this because I knew solar on every roof, your manufacturing wasn't going to be all of it. But the point I thought of bringing two really big companies together was that if people don't know what a power purchasing agreement, the logic is that Unilever has to sign a lease, right, for the power for 15 to 20 years. We knew that would kind of be a challenge, and that's why legal and finance have to get involved. But I thought that the two companies could talk kind of at a portfolio level across number of facilities easier than they could, and that in reality, each project, and I think a lot of people working at the local level know this, each project had its own economics, right? So it wasn't just put solar on every roof, it was that these pay off immediately and these don't. And I thought, well, because we're talking at this level with the leaders of both companies, we'll just do an average. and we'll have an average price for energy across and that's what a master PPA kind of does, but that's really not easy. And I think it's one of the first of its kind for a manufacturing setting. I mean, there's been master PPAs, Staples or Walmart or, in retail settings where it pays off at pretty much every location if they do it right. But in manufacturing, where you're paying so much less for energy, this is what I learned from all of this, that it's just it's a much deeper challenge. And this is why you're seeing, I think, solar not go as fast as it even could, even as cheap as it's gotten. Is that accurate?
Unilever's very strategically placed their plants in low-cost environments. And so you don't have
really inconvenient for you, though.
You don't have the ability to scale perhaps like you would on a retail rooftop of a big box store. You have to go in and you have to do a pretty significant analysis to determine not only how you can configure the on-site application, how your interconnection is going to work, how the utility in that area works, and then you have an avoided cost of electricity that you calculate based on the consumption amount and the tariff amount and a lot of other factors. And when you get down to that avoided cost number, when you're in flyover country, those numbers are less than 6 cents per kWh. And so you're comparing or trying to compare a 40-year-old coal plant grid-connected power source to brand new steel in the ground with today's labor rates being put onto a factory that may have a rooftop that's more than 10 years old, and trying to incorporate all those costs into this, and that's just on one facility. And then you're trying to do it across 20 to 24 facilities. Hopefully most of them are owned and not leased, because then that adds a whole another layer of complication. But having the support at the top and the desire to do this as a portfolio means that you do get a little bit of leverage to be able to talk about, we can look at it as an average across the portfolio, and then internally, folks on Jonathan's team are going to have to figure out how does the accounting work for each of the factory directors, and how do you tell one that he's going to get a cost allocation, and then whereas others might get a little bit of a cost support.
Can you dig a little bit more on the organizational learning? Because part of the partnership is that it will accelerate this for other companies, right? And NRG has now announced partnerships with Kaiser Permanente and Starwood following this. But when you've gone through the process with Unilever and seen, internally, what do we have to learn and how do we have to adapt to serve these clients? Where have been there specific examples of sort of saying, well, we have to adapt and change our process to be able to serve the needs of this client?
So I think there's some things that are, as rudimentary as the accounting treatment for, how do you look at power purchase agreements, and how do you look at the structure of contracting across multiple technologies. So with the way NRG is currently structured, we have a Renew organization that focuses on solar and wind and renewable assets, and then we have a group called DGen that focuses on non-renewable distributed generation assets, and then we've got some other efficiency groups that are in there too, and of course they've all got their own corporate names. And how do you figure out the contracting issues, right? So that's just sort of at a basic corporate functioning level, and then you get down to the accounting issues, and then you get to sort of cross-cultural issues as well. So within Unilever, the view of how you talk about some of these contracts and the duration, especially in an environment in the United States where you don't have a significant amount of subsidy, and you don't have a lot of incentives for a lot of the programs that we're talking about and that Unilever is committed to doing. The payback term is much, much greater, and it's a pretty clear numbers perspective. It's like we can have a higher escalation rate of your power purchase price over the next 15 years, and you get a lower cost right now, or we can have a lower cost and less of an escalation rate, however it works. The numbers are what the numbers are relative to trying to make a transaction feasible, especially in that low-cost power environment. And so getting to how to look at those markets and how to describe, understanding what the pitfalls might be when we're talking about with European counterparts versus U.S. counterparts and differences in accounting treatment. There are so many things that you don't think about until you get there and you're like, oh, right, okay, now I understand why they asked that question. But it took us 3 months of circling around with auditors to figure out what the answer to that is. What we've got now as a benefit of our 15 months of hard labor is we can short circuit a lot of those conversations and say, this is what you need to do to get the answer for you.
Yeah, and Jonathan, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and there's also a language issue. And I remember, when we came into this story, we were 100% offset by renewable energy credits. And I remember the CFO coming to me and saying, do I understand this right, that basically it's a pretty good thing, but it doesn't really change behavior. And it doesn't add anything onto the grid. And I said, I think you have it right, Henry. And he said, well, what would be the next step? And it was kind of the beginning of this was actually before the advisory council, but there was this conversation starting saying, what's the next step? And so we've created this framework now where we've got, what we're saying is a quality improvement program on renewables. So we're saying the goal out in 2020 is 75%, what is it? It's offsite, directed offsite, some onsite, and some CHP. And of course, I'm always putting in there that, and some unknown technology solution. I mean, I want to get to a place where we basically would say by 2030 we'd be off the grid or something, something really big out there, and then drive to something like that. But we're in this, we've got a very calculated framework about how this is all going to look and how it's all going to work. But I've been a little bit surprised at how long it's taken to actually get everybody speaking the same language. Like, does everybody really understand what we're talking about here? And not just a couple people who really knew. And it's been a conversation at leadership team meetings. It's been a conversation at various meetings where you have to almost start at the beginning, like, why are we doing this again? And what's really the story? And I don't really understand the science, but what's the general kind of flow of this? And we have to describe that and talk it through. So there's been a language issue, I think, more on our part than your part, probably, from a technical standpoint.
Well,
simplifying.
I think it's three parts, right? It's internal, and then it's also how do we talk to each other about it?
And then the other creative thing that I think we did was that we set up we call them top to tops. I'm not sure what you call them, but Case and David. So the two CEOs get together once a quarter. They have the support teams with them, but the two leads actually have a conversation about where are we on track? Are we clear on the objective? Where are we on track? Where are we off track? What do we need to do? What can we do as the leaders to move things out of the way to keep us moving in the right direction? Yep. I've never been in conversations like that before. They're quite fascinating. Two kind of alpha males going after it, right? Interesting. Like, go hard, go faster. A lot of work to do. Yeah. Talk to you in a quarter.
Can you compress 18 months into the next 3 months?
Yeah.
We'd like to get this done.
Is that what you feel like in some ways distinguishes this partnership or the transformational partnerships approach that Unilever have, is that there's this commitment to when you're going off track, having this sort of engaged discussion on both sides about how to get it back on track and really understanding we're going to overcome these challenges? And Andrew, is there, when you look at the landscape of the other announcements that are out here, you've seen Apple, partnering with First Solar to do one, 280 megawatt deal in California. You've seen, Walmart with over 12.5% of, their energy coming from on-site renewables. Like, what about this partnership for you differentiates it from some of the other ones that we're seeing?
Well, I think, and this is not to belittle the other announcements at all. They're critically important because they're demonstration of the scale of investment in renewables. But Walmart has said very clearly that, and they're the biggest buyer of solar in the country outside of the military. They've said very clearly that every kilowatt of green power costs them the same or less than brown power. And on the one hand, that's been an incredibly powerful message, and I use it all the time to say to businesses, hey, you keep thinking this green thing is expensive, you're out of date on renewables. There's a whole bunch of renewables you can do that are cheap. But on the other hand, it says we're only going to do what pays back in traditional terms, which, and to go back to what I said this morning about kind of science-based, and this is one of my kind of focus areas in my work, is that's not as fast as the science indicates. And so what scares me about it is every company saying, we'll go as fast as the economics allows. Well, I mean, Walmart has said we'll be 100% renewable someday as soon as the economics are good. And to me, that's what the minimum of every company should do. The fact that most companies aren't already doing as much as them is kind of strange at this point. Like, they're doing all stuff that makes money, right? So what's different here is the level of ambition, for the most part. And this is true of, look what Jonathan just said. He said, well, I'm thinking maybe by 2030 it could be off the grid. So it's not even good enough that they've said 100% renewable by 2020, with an understanding that doesn't really include RECs anymore, like a super high quality 100%. So that's a different level.
You just defined RECs quickly.
Well, the renewable energy credits, which you can pay for basically $1 for every ton to say, we bought renewable energy, and we can probably have a really heated debate about that in here, but I just believe that market has shifted dramatically from what it was originally, which was to help drive the creation of more renewable energy. And I don't think there's no way the amount of capital that $1 a ton provides does that anymore. So it's not accomplishing that. It's a marketing statement. It's not greenwashing, but it's a marketing statement. But so to me, the real stuff is what you said, on grid, on site, and then off site, but that you've paid for or you've signed the lease for. That is additional. And that's what's different here is the quality of it. And that's what as a board, we've talked about this. And Unilever's done this across a number of their dimensions, their supply chain, their procurement goals on sustainable sourcing is nothing is black and white. There's not sustainable sourced and unsustainable sourced. There's gradations. And they have this incredible way of thinking about let's increase the percentage that's the highest standard. We talked about pricing carbon. What's the highest standard? Well, the social cost of carbon at $40, $50 a ton. That would be the highest standard of pricing it internal. Like these are the conversations you have with a Unilever. So that's different. And David's leadership at NRG allows the company to come in, I think, and say to a Unilever, we can try to do everything we can and be this portfolio provider for you at scale. And we are committed. Because what I've heard this repeatedly, is that most utilities have walked into big companies and said, you keep asking us about renewables, but we've provided you with low-cost, reliable power for 100 years. What's your problem? I've heard this from people, and they've said it started to change recently where utilities will walk in and say, okay, we're hearing you. You want a different kind of energy. How can we help? David's one of the reasons I think that other utilities are starting to sound like that. So it's just, to me, it was like, we need these two leaders to succeed. I truly believe when Unilever said 5 years ago, we want to double our sales while having our footprint, that one of the ways to do this is everybody just buy Unilever products. It sounds silly, but like we need that to succeed. And we need David to succeed, I think, very badly. So the utility world can shift. So to me, it's like two things, like you make a teepee or something, like there's two things leaning and they create something because they're each like, how do I go out there and do this in the world? And now you've got kind of support. Yeah. That's what I think. That's what collaboration is, right? That's how you go to scale. Yeah. And I had hoped that this would bring in others too, that there'd be other partners as well. I mean,
there was another external force at Unilever, and that was Hurricane Sandy, because we went down and our headquarters in New Jersey was shut down for about 2 weeks. And until then, it was kind of this was the rec conversation was out here, and there was a lot of conversation, but it was way out here. And then all of a sudden, we were shut down, and that started a much different conversation. And we didn't come up because there was a power line 6 miles down the road that was down and wasn't coming back up. And it led to a whole conversation internally about we can never have that happen again. We had generators, but they weren't enough. I sourced generators in Louisiana and other places. But it started this conversation about we can't have that happen again. There's a real risk here, right? Our next door neighbor in New Jersey happens to be CNBC. They have military grade backup, right? They're up and running, but they couldn't help us because it's off of their generators. But if I have a vision about maybe we can get off the grid, I also have a vision about maybe creating a green corridor with our neighbors as an example, like take it to a microgrid level and saying, I have a neighbor at CNBC and I have a neighbor beyond that, which is LG. 3 companies that are independent of each other. Is there a way that the 3 of us can come together and create something together? We all have a mutual interest here. There's nothing competitive here. Why don't we do something? And there's varying levels of interest about that. But we're constantly trying to push to the next place. You might want to talk about community solar and all that, what we're doing in Vermont. But it's these bigger benefits, if you will. Can we build them in? And sometimes we can, and sometimes they seem really hard, but we keep working it.
You mentioned something, and Lynda, I want you to pick up on this if you can. We've talked a lot about the challenges of overcoming internal barriers, and Jonathan, you mentioned this external prompt that pushed you all to think about this in a different way. What are the barriers to scale that you're seeing externally? What are the things being thrown up at a local level where you all are trying to implement this partnership, and then you're seeing, well, we can do it here, but we can't do it there, and how are you navigating that process?
Yeah, so we certainly are putting our heads together with a number of other folks as well, trying to figure out how to overcome some of the regulatory barriers, right? And so that may be as straightforward as it's a regulated state for electricity and there's no third-party ownership allowed of off-site generation. So North Carolina, for instance. Or it may be something where you're in Tennessee and the cost of power is just so inexpensive because it's hydro and coal that it's really tough to compete. And then there may have also been other incentives and things that were put in place for expanding plants that again, makes it tougher to do. So I think we're working together to try and go after some of those state and local regulations, and that's a long haul, right? I mean, you're looking at legislative agendas, you're trying to figure out, how do you build a coalition around making renewable energy something that is important to a state legislature and important enough to give it recognition so that it's allowed to compete on a level playing field. Not even talking about incentives, and then we can go to the federal level and start talking about ITC expiration and PTC expiration. And do those tax credits expiring, how much can they really put the skids on some of these marketplaces? When we think about 1231.16, you're falling off of a 30% cliff and finding suddenly that even though you've had tremendous downward pressure on the costs of your inputs for solar and potentially for wind and increased efficiencies, you've now got a pretty tremendous bump in the cost of putting those together. So we've been working together with Jonathan's team and Green Strategies as well to try and figure out how to go from state to state and figure those things out. But I think beyond that too, we find that as we talk to other companies, there are a lot of questions, right? And there's skepticism and then there's some excitement. And so getting those two things together and trying to figure out how to overcome those barriers and how to have these kinds of conversations. I mean, this is pretty much a tremendous opportunity for us to be able to talk about the partnership and what we're doing and to be able to share the fact that it's not easy and to be able to share the fact that this came about because of not a chance meeting, but because of a thoughtful partnering. But it does take a lot of work.
And unintended benefits, I think. I mean, we also think systematic, right? So we're looking for system kind of solutions as opposed to kind of one-off solutions on anything, whether it's renewable energy or anything else. But there's a whole employee benefit here, right? So we're having employees working with NRG picking up solar as a benefit, as an employee benefit. 15, 20 employees are now signed up, and that will hopefully expand. But now we're building out the employee benefit piece. There's this advocacy piece within the legislative arena and regulatory space. There are lots of things, and I think the buzz now within the building is you made this audacious target. You're actually making a move now. It's building it out. Can I get to a place where I can claim it on PAC? I don't know. That's not the reason why we're doing this. It's pretty far down. In my view, it's a little bit down the road. But there will be a question at some point from the marketer saying, is there going to be any value in making a claim against this, based on where they're doing it within which plant? So, we're looking at it very holistically about where we can touch it. The education piece internally, the whole financial conversation has been amazing and will pay dividends going forward because we're not in the same ROI conversation. The classic, does it pay back in 3, 4, 5 years? We're not in that conversation. We're in a completely different conversation, and we're all learning together effectively.
Well, in terms of expanding that conversation, I'd like to solicit questions from the audience on the partnership. Any comments you had, experiences? Yeah, Judith.
Hi, Judy Albert from Environmental Entrepreneurs. Question for you, Jonathan, on your very last point. If you're not in the old ROI conversation, what does the economic conversation look like?
We need to make this work. This has to end in savings. We're not doing this. This is not a charitable or philanthropic effort. So throughout this portfolio approach, the end result will be a savings to Unilever. Now, how we get there, that's where the hard work is. But make no mistake, we're not doing this and losing money and hoping that this will help some other people will come into the story. So how we construct that's what we have to get creative and we have to work really hard.
Because we're not in it to lose money either.
Because NRG's not to lose money, we're not in to lose money, and we're not doing this because it's nice to say that we've done it. So that's what we're constructing.
And I think we can look at more than just the solar portfolio, right?
Absolutely.
We're looking at a large-scale wind transaction that provides directed RECs. We're looking at employee benefit plans. We're looking at reduced carbon numbers from having EV charging available to all employees. And so rolling a lot of these different types of benefits in that wouldn't necessarily be considered in a one-off project, rolling in energy efficiency into the plants, looking at combined heat and power projects for various manufacturing facilities. So putting all of these things, all these possibilities to bear in a conversation that historically they would have been looked at only one at a time.
Paul Landsberg, Forest Products Association of Canada. For you, Jonathan, before you started on the renewables, how much of the conversation was around energy efficiency? Because the greenest energy is the energy we don't use. So how much were you able to achieve on that front before you started on renewables?
I would say that we're doing extremely well in that space. Obviously more to do, but it wasn't going to get us there, right? So we do very well in our own operations from an efficiency standpoint. Every year we continue to have reductions and continue to do the right thing. Now the question is, can we transform the market? That's really the story. It's kind of the overall story for Unilever. If you look at our whole footprint, our whole model is built on a full value chain approach, right? We looked at from sourcing in the ground to disposal at the end. I joined Unilever 3 years ago, and I had the mistaken impression, I have a lot of those, but I had the mistaken impression that probably sourcing was going to be the big footprint item. The truth is 70% of our footprint is in consumer usage. 70%. It's not in our own operations. So even if I were to solve, and we were the most efficient, greenest operation, that's not going to be enough, right? It's not going to make that much difference. Logistics is not going to make enough. It's none of these pieces. It's in consumer usage. So, I don't want to be too bold, but I would like to see a day that every single Unilever consumer somehow bought into this whole story that we're doing here, and kind of it all came together in some miraculous way that every single Dove consumer had solar panels on their roof. I don't know how that works. I don't know how that works. But in other words, how does this whole story come together where I can also change behavior of not only employees who are also consumers, but I can also change kind of more mainstream consumer behavior to say, look at that company, they're taking yet another step. I want to be with those kinds of companies. I purchase from them, right? So it's purpose to purchase. We have a purpose. Now the question is, can we convert it? That's the model.
Andy?
Yeah, I've got an idea for you on that. How do you push it out to the consumer and your employees too? And that really is built on the alternative financing concept that came out of California back in 2008, property assessed clean energy finance, which we helped get instituted here in Connecticut and also in Texas, two very different political spectrum states. But the concept is based on the same idea. You get the benefit of the reduced energy cost and moving into renewables, and or create a deep dive on your building and retrofit the building for energy efficiency. But you have the financial institutions that are part of that system cover the upfront cost, and then you pay back over up to 20 or even 30 years that cost on your property tax bill as essentially an assessment. It's proven to work really well, and for a company like Unilever to recognize that and kind of help step up and get behind that. NRG has already been a big supporter of that in Texas with us, but the practitioners that are like the big corporate players like yourselves, when we've talked about this with them, they typically answer, well, we self-finance everything. We don't need that. But your statement about really trying to change the marketplace, coming forward as a leader to promote that kind of an idea would be terrific, I think.
Did you get that?
I do. We're talking about that with you and
Good. She's talking to me about that.
Thank you for sharing such a great story, but I was wondering if we could get a couple of parameters. My name's Maureen Coates. How much electricity are we talking about? What's the bogey you have to make, and what are your budget estimates and your timeline estimates for implementation between now and 2020? How have you laid this out over your operating timeline? So much a year for a number of years, that sort of thing.
Go ahead.
Can I answer that?
Yeah.
So what we're looking at right now for Unilever with the Texas wind transaction that we did that was intended to cover 100% of their manufacturing facilities' electricity consumption, that equates to about 100 megawatts. So it's 400,000 megawatt hours a year. And that transaction is a short-term transaction, 3 years, and it was intended to be a bridge to a new build. And the new build may be one transaction, it may be several transactions trying to get as close to their operations as possible, which Texas right now is not. but it was a way to get them involved in the conversation for directed recs. Now, going forward, they've got really strong goals for energy efficiency and plans to reduce that 400,000 megawatt hours annually pretty significantly. And so a combination of that with the roadmap that we have in place for solar, combined heat and power, and offsite wind, we're hoping to be able to get there. Solar's it's a tough stretch when you're looking at manufacturing facilities, a lot of whom don't have any external land that's available for ground mount. But we will kick it off this year with one, possibly two installations with Ben & Jerry's in Vermont, and through the energy efficiency projects, the combined heat and power projects, we plan to get there by 2020. We're not exactly sure what's going to happen between now and then, but we're also talking about potential microgrids for some of the facilities, especially in Englewood Cliffs. So we're counting on the decline cost curve of batteries and being able to bring those to bear.
So what is Unilever planning to spend?
As little as possible.
Yeah.
Well, but it's not additional. A PPA is not additional spend. It's about signing the contract, right? It's about the internal taking on of a lease and where does that sit on the books and those kinds of pronouncements going to your accountants and it's not actually a capital issue.
That's right.
Right? It's a organizational issue, which I guess is sometimes worse than a capital issue.
And the goal is cost neutrality or better.
For the portfolio, right? Let's go back to that point, the point of the master PPA, and this is what I think is a first step. For me, there's two big steps to making this go at scale, since that's the theme for today, which is first, portfolio. So you do some things that if you just looked at it would actually cost you a little more because it's not in an area that's as sunny or it's a really, really cheap energy location. To me, the longer term or the bigger issue is how do we think about ROI in companies in general? And everything you just said about has to be cost neutral is in traditional ROI terms, right? For how much do we spend for energy in cash versus what is the value of putting this all up on our facilities for our employees? Is there a value to that? What is the value of if you go to a actual off-grid, microgrid location? What's the resilience value of not losing your headquarters for 2 weeks, right? I mean, there's value to that we don't put in. And this is, I think critical that we need to expand what we put numbers on and put value on. Very difficult to do, but that's part of what I work with PwC on and why I work with them as they do that kind of valuation work. Is how do you put numbers on things that are hard to measure and include it in your ROI? It's just a harder conversation with finance and with public shareholders, but that's real value. That's how we'd go fast. I think much faster if we took that value into account.
You buy that answer?
I think there's a real conversation to be had about incorporating carbon cost curves, whether or not they're truly allocated or they're phantom. But in terms of if you want to take it back to that traditional.
Well, yeah, but if there's something that comes out of Paris that it won't be in Paris, but that leads to an actual some kind of price, some kind of global-ish price, well, then it's not externalized anymore.
That's right.
And it's actually internalized, and it changes your economics. And cost neutral becomes a totally different conversation. And you can maybe get rid of worrying about whether the politicians keep passing PTCs or not, right? Or the tax credits, if we can just price carbon. I mean, this is why that's so critical.
Roberta, you had a question?
Yeah, hi, it's Roberta Barbieri with Diageo. Well done, you guys. That's great project, and kudos to Andrew for matching you up. You mentioned, Jonathan, unintended benefits through the employee thing. Can you think of any other unintended benefits or unintended consequences from the project? And I'd be interested, Lynda, to hear if you're, from an NRG perspective, had found either as well.
Good question. Maybe I shouldn't have called them unintended. Maybe they were not thought of, right? I can't think of any. I mean, any that we haven't kind of gone through now that we haven't learned. I mean, it's interesting. It kind of flows to this conversation about, we've been saying for 3 years now at Unilever, 4 years, that brands with a purpose grow faster. We've had this kind of mantra, brands with a purpose grow faster. And finally in May of this year, we did the financial data, went back 4 years, did all the modeling, and figured out with numbers that in fact that statement was true. Right? That in fact, the brands with a purpose, we call them sustainable living brands that have a purpose and that make a contribution to the sustainable living plan, that those brands actually made up half of Unilever's growth globally. They grew twice as fast as the other brands and the core operating margin was better. you cannot imagine the excitement that single statement on May 5th of this year, finally putting it out there. I'm getting to your point, which is basically who that really hit. It got me really excited, but the marketers who weren't sure that story really held up, now are getting really excited. They want to work on brands with a purpose. They want to be on a brand that's either got a purpose or is working towards a purpose, right? And so there are those kinds of things. I would almost say it's a cultural thing that when people see things, when they see the charging stations, when they see this kind of activity, words are words. What they can see is different. It's created a real buzz amongst a lot of different functions and a lot of people, particularly a lot of the younger employees that we have that are now joining the company, who have chosen Unilever because of the Sustainable Living Plan as maybe one of the primary reasons. And they see that there's action, and they keep having ideas, and what about this, and what about that? There haven't been that many negatives. It's been hard. I just have to keep saying it. It's been hard. There have been times, honestly, when I thought this was over, that we had hit the point that I didn't think that we weren't going to be able to break through. Whether it was a financial lease and that whole conversation, that got very complicated, right? How long is the agreement going to be? We've never signed anything that long in Unilever's history. We've had that conversation. Why now? There have been times, quite honestly, where I felt like maybe we've gone as far as we're going to go. And it just seemed like we got the next breath and the next breath, and another conversation, another review of it, and another, and different voices coming into the conversation. So it's been really powerful. And as most things that happen at Unilever within the Sustainable Living Plan context, they always seem to have a lot of these kinds of things that sustainable agriculture started out as being a soybean project, but that really wasn't what it's turned out to be. I knew it wasn't going to be that. We now have the farmers in the TV ads, right? It started out being a kind of on-the-farm project, and now it turns out to be a TV ad and a big piece of the marketing, right? Connecting the two things. So I just kind of use these models every single step of the way, whether it's renewable energy, whether it's sustainable agriculture, whether it's recycling, to kind of always look, because I also look after communications, to always look at the internal audience, what's it going to mean for them, and how can I make it understandable, not dumb it down, but make it understandable so that everybody can feel like they're a part of and have inputs to, but also try to tell a story about why is this the way forward? It's the only way forward, in my estimation, and I think in the company's estimation. It's the only way forward. This level of thinking about system thinking around system challenges requires system solutions, not one-offs. Not a series of one-offs. Too hard to manage, number one, and number two, they're not adding up to enough, right? We don't need to have, closed loop fund is a good example on recycling. It's a new model where 7, 8, 10 companies have come together and put money together for no interest loans to municipalities. Can you imagine what that financial conversation was? We're going to put our money up so that the city of Phoenix can get a no interest loan. Why are you doing that? Then when you explain it through, it's, oh my gosh, this is a really cool pilot. This is a really cool idea. Am I 100% sure it's going to work? I'm not. I'm pretty confident it's going to work. But what's the alternative, right? There is no alternative. So we pursued in that space too.
So you can see why this is contagious, right? Also why he's the communications guy and I may not be. But I think for NRG, having a partner like Unilever has truly been, it's been a tremendous catalyst. Make no mistake, we were doing onesies and twosies, right? And we wanted to have a much greater effect on change and be part of a transformation from our traditional core business that was electricity generation from fossil fuels into something that was better management of those combined with increasing our renewable focus and increasing our renewable future and our commitment to that globally and not just in Texas or not just in particular areas where we had generation. And I think the conversation with Unilever and the ability to talk about it across the company has brought not only a lot of different pieces together that didn't talk before, because I had to bring everybody together to have the conversation about what are we going to do for Unilever, because it takes this piece and this piece and this piece and this piece, and those guys have traditionally just been in their own businesses. But it also was truly a factor that excited people about what they were doing again in a bigger context, because here was somebody who was willing to say out loud they were going out with us. right? And that's a big thing, right? I mean, we got to wear the ring. I think having that conversation and being able to talk about it internally had as much benefit for us as it has been externally, being able to share our conversation with others.
I mean, look at
Facebook status.
Yeah, that's right. In a relationship. Yeah.
we're in a committed relationship
But open
now.
to others.
But open to others, right?
I mean, you could tell I'm a little different. 3 years ago, I was living on a farm in Vermont, and then I joined Unilever in a very corporate environment. But putting that aside, I look at my role as kind of the provocateur, but also the champion. And so, if you take this idea, and there's a number of wild ideas that we can go and talk about within the framework of even this partnership. So, we have two big partners in Feeding American Boys and Girls Club. What would happen if Unilever, NRG, and other folks wanted to put solar panels in every Boys and Girls Club around America? We could change not only the economics for Boys and Girls Club, but we could change kind of the whole story, right? Or if we put them on food shelters. I'm constantly trying to push out to say, what are the big ideas? Don't have all of them, but have some. Who are the partners that are willing to step into kind of uncharted waters to say, we're not sure about that either, but we want to be a part of that conversation because that's really exciting so that we can do big transformational change. I mean, otherwise we're going to be stuck in this kind of dynamic where it's a CapEx conversation. I mean, I don't know about you, I get bored in that conversation. I get bored in a conversation that's stuck in ROI and CapEx. Okay, I get that. What's the bigger story here? Is it the urban youth that we might change their lives if we go to Boys and Girls Club? We might. There's 6,000 of them. I don't have anything about the economic model about that. But I also want to be able to change the conversation I'm having with my partners to say, maybe there's more in the story than just us providing a check or us providing volunteers. Maybe there's something bigger. Let me introduce you to one of my colleagues that I'm dating, and maybe you two should have a conversation, right? Or maybe there's another company out there that says, I was interested in what you said. Can I join the party or at least join the conversation? I'm not committing to anything, but can I join? And in that way, this flywheel starts to spin, and something really big is going to happen in multiple places on multiple issues. That's basically our logic.
We're breaking new ground on corporate dating. I can see the emoticons on Twitter right now. There's going to be some NRG, Unilever hearts.
Well, I'm just stressing. I'm going to have a new card, Sustainability Yenta. I'm going to be for the Jews in the room, like matchmaker.
Something happens. You come on campus. Something happens. Something happens.
See, this is all that a master's is. This kind of feeling.
Is this what
Yeah.
Maybe I should come up here and get a master's. That's right.
Marion,
If they'd accept me.
time for one more question. Peter.
Yeah, great stuff. It's Peter Boyd from the B team. So Paul Pullman's actually a member of the B team, and I think this type of out the box thinking where the big goal happens first is fantastic. I only had one question, but now I've got two with a Facebook conversation. The first one is like you started like a US initiative on a $200 billion company that went RE100 globally. Can you speak to like how it started in the US and went global, and then have the other parts got global partners as good and as strong as NRG? And then the second part is like your process to going exclusive. Like did you have an RFP? Did you have a speed dating, or did you just find each other?
I'll start at the back end. There was no speed dating.
Trusted me, which was terrifying.
So there was
honestly.
we trusted Andrew. We talked about it internally. We decided. And I think it also answers your other question, which is we've created this in the U.S. It is not being recreated elsewhere yet. But I think one of the interesting parts of the conversation is Unilever typically will want to go to scale or will want to share great ideas elsewhere. And so I know that David has been to see Paul in London. There's other conversations going on. I think, and you can talk more about it, but I think NRG's one of their strategies is to go kind of help countries that don't have grids or the grid is a little bit minimized, if you will. And so we're taking a bit of a chance, quite honestly, in the US. We've stepped out, and it kind of was US first, and then we brought the globe. It wasn't kind of the globe thought of it, and then they came to me and said, let's do this. And sometimes it works in both directions on multiple different things. But this time we've done this. I think that what you'll see is, my prediction is that you will see NRG and Unilever do other things together outside of the United States. That's my prediction. Anything to add on that?
Any final
I
thoughts?
think that's accurate.
Great. Well, we have Jonathan and Lynda here for a little while after this. And building on Jonathan's point, the next sessions are the emergent conversations on areas where you can think big. And areas from climate smart agriculture to forestry to others, where you can have those conversations with colleagues in the room on where do you figure out those transformative partnerships. And so on behalf of the Yale Center for Business and the Environment, I'd just really like to thank our three panelists for their time and a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. Good tapping. Good tapping.
We are going to take a quick break, but as everyone can see,